When the Black Death passed through Europe, and here's a color-coded map to kind of show us the progress. Remember, starting in 1347, as it comes through this area of Europe, we have the idea that the plague, of course, is being spread by traders. They're taking it from what you know as Asia and then bringing it back to their home bases here, and you can see the progression by color. That's where it's happening in 1347. So this is human-spread disease. The people who had been infected on the edge of what you know as the modern-day Ukraine, Russia, are now carrying it by ship, so that the vector, the way in which this disease is spreading, is not simply the natural spread of, say, the rat population with the flea on it. This is a human-caused catastrophe, and it's entering into Europe at a time where there's a lot of people who are under and malnourished. As you had read, Europe had experienced a series of famines in the 30 to 40 years before the Black Death. There is a significant overpopulation issue. There's a conversation in many European places about the maximum population they could have because of food supply, and there's a lot of people who are malnourished. There's also commentary about paupers, many people being displaced and going to the cities. So 1347 is the time frame that we're looking at. And this area of Europe is where it starts, and then year by year it spreads, all right? It spreads by trade route. It also spreads by the seasons. What's also interesting, though, is take a look at some places like I had earlier mentioned, some places like in Poland, which are not on the direct trade route of many of the European systems of trade. It's part of the trade network, but it's not one of the key areas. It is one of the areas of Europe that does not have a significant amount of issues with the plague, in part because, remember, this is being spread by humans, and there is less human activity in those areas. So what's going to happen is this. The plague is going to devastate the population in many areas. It's not going to kill land. It's not going to destroy trees. It's not going to take out, it's not going to kill fish. So much of the food production system of Europe is going to continue, but now there's two issues. There is a lot less ability for people to be controlled by their feudal landlord. All right, for example, that old system of manorialism where many people lived on farms that were not property they owned and exchanged their labor to their lord. When they were vassals of their lord, they were the ones who were underneath them in authority and power. Those kind of people now are increasingly being able to go back to their landlords and say, well, listen, essentially we all know that you used to have 100 people chasing after, say, 90 jobs, so to speak. Well, now there's only 70 people still around. We want better conditions. We want more food. There's lots of places where landlords start to include food as an issue to help their workers come and work. They increase wages overall, and they find other concessions. The old world before the plague had been dominated by the landlord class. They had controlled the biggest asset and the most important asset in Europe, which was the land. Now, with a lower amount of laborers available and still as much land and animals and trees that need to be cultivated and pruned and harvested, labor is in a position now to see an increase in what happens. So this relatively serious labor crisis is going to set in motion the destruction of some of the oldest parts of feudalism in Western Europe, where the people who had essentially been serfs were bound to the land, or had been in a situation where they owned virtually no land and were dependent on their landlord. They now are in a position to ask for more for more wages for their labor, and it's going to help break the feudal system. The feudal system will go from exchanging labor for working on the land to some cash exchanges. As the landlords are trying to maximize what they can do with their property, many of them see a decrease in their incomes of 20% or more. So we see that this has a genuine impact, and it's only because, well, it is basically because the Black Death had really taken the labor market out and made labor much more expensive after the plague. Now, many different places had created opportunities to try and stop this. There's a famous case in England called the English Statute of Laborers of the year 1351. It had tried to set maximum and minimum prices. The elite had simply tried to go into Parliament with the King's consent and just arbitrarily set a price for what someone's going to pay for a good or what they're going to be paid for a certain kind of labor. It was an artificial attempt by the elite to get back the good old days, and of course it will fail. It will fail because the landlords, they have to get done what they have to get done with their land, and if you don't have somebody to come and pick the pears or the apples or to harvest the wheat, it will rot. And then all of your investment will be gone. So they do have to rely on labor, and they do have to offer competitive terms, and they do. But it also is going to set in motion an issue where many European rulers need to keep their tax bases up. They need to find a way to raise more revenue on less people. And what's going to happen is they will try to create different kinds of taxation. And in many cases, some of the most famous rebellions you'll read about are the ones in 1358 in France called the Jacquerie. You'll also read about the English Peasants' Rebellion of 1381 and what's called the Ciompi Rebellion in northern Italy, in Tuscany, in 1378. Each of them is essentially an economic kind of warfare where the poor, the working class, feel that they are not getting a fair share of the economy. They use the opportunity of a labor shortage and of price instability to try and advocate for more in terms of what they can do in terms of wages or legal freedoms or whatever they're looking for. But nonetheless, there is an attempt here to note that the elite are losing their their economic power over society. That one of the key issues they have in control is now being eroded. The oversupply of labor is now gone, and now there's an undersupply of labor, and now the ball is sort of in labor's court in terms of being able to make a better deal. Please take a look at some of the opportunities for you to review this material inside your text, but the key elements to take away here is that the Black Death is going to open up many more economic opportunities for people, undermine the power of the traditional landlord class to control the people that are working on their farms, and in many ways open up Europe to a larger movement toward what could start to be a capitalist-driven kind of economy, a cash-driven economy, not a labor for living on the land exchange that is famous in feudalism. These are very small events over time that are leading us towards the creation of what we're going to call capitalism in time, but we're walking that trail. We're getting there. Western civilization is now having its social and economic underpinnings changed. Take a look inside your readings for that, and then, of course, see if there's any of the practice exam questions that can help you with this area.